Thank you for joining Key Drug Addiction Counseling Skills and Techniques. My name is Desiree Cochran Norfolk. I am an addiction counselor. I have a master's in addiction counseling, and I am certified by the Georgia Addiction Counselors Association as a certified clinical supervisor, certified master addiction counselor, and a CAC2. I'm also certified through Florida as an MCAP, and I have my anger management certification. So we're going to be talking about client assessment in this particular lesson. And assessing a client at intake is a really delicate step in treatment and rehabilitation because clients are often depressed or anxious or suspicious or confused or resistant. And even those who appear to be calm and positive, they're often hiding their feelings. And they're going to need a lot of encouragement and support to talk about their intimate personal problems. So during that first intake interview, you want to explain that the sessions are confidential. This is going to be very important. The initial guided assessment with a specific set of questions is a really important tool for you so that you can gather a complete history from each of your clients. But your client might be scared of completing a questionnaire. So it's better to start the interview informally rather than just putting the questionnaire between you and the client. And then after you break the ice by showing that you care about your client's feelings, then you can start filling in the assessment forms. I typically like to start my assessments out by asking the general background questions. Where are you from? Are you married? Do you have any kids? What do you do for a living? How many people live in the household? Things like that. Very innocuous questions that kind of get their guard down and help them to kind of better explain who they are and what they're about before they get into the really deep stuff. And, while some of your clients may arrive with the expectation that you can help them, others are simply just going to resist and test your understanding of drug use. And some may see you as a negative figure, like part of the system that's never helped them before. And so your job as a counselor is to approach all new clients with compassion, no matter how hostile or difficult they might be. And a lot of them will be hostile or difficult. And drug users who have been forced to join treatment by a spouse or their parent or their doctor or a legal institution, they might resist you by refusing to answer any of your questions. So you can respond to this attitude with empathy by saying something like, I can understand your feelings about coming here today, but problems can be solved and we can try to do this together. But first, I'd really like to learn a little bit more about you. And so you may not be able to complete a full assessment during that first meeting. And the various parts of the client file can be filled in during successive counseling sessions. And after you've established feelings of trust and confidence between you and the client, the file is going to allow for continuous record keeping, even during the rehabilitation phase. So you can use additional information sheets to record major events like lapses and relapses, as well as important achievements, for as long as you stay in touch with the client. So in this lesson today, I hope that by the end, you're going to be able to understand why assessments are important, understand the procedures and contents of an assessment, and demonstrate your knowledge and skills of client assessments through role play. And since this is going to be a virtual session, we won't be able to do role play, so I've included a couple of videos of role play in the lesson below this, so you'll be able to see how that works. But I do encourage you to practice role play with a person that you feel comfortable with in your setting. And I also want you to apply your client assessment knowledge and skills while counseling drug users. So the assessment is really the first of a number of ongoing steps in treatment and recovery. And it's the process that we use in the first few meetings with the client, which is what we call intake. And we're using this to identify and evaluate the client's general situation, including their strengths, their weaknesses, their problems and needs. And we're doing this in order to develop the client's treatment plan and their recovery goals. We can't develop a treatment plan until we know what the problems are. And so assessment is just this process of learning the personal history of the client. And we want to listen to the client and their family. And we can't succeed in helping them until we have knowledge of their background, including their personal, their educational, and work history, in addition to their drug use. And I've said this in another lesson or another course that I've done, but when we discuss background, one of the important factors in maintaining sobriety is the client's social setting. So is anybody using in the household? Did they come from a household with substance abuse? Are their partners using? What's going on with their kids? Are there custody issues going on? Are there environmental stressors going on? These are things that are going to prevent the client from having a successful recovery. And so these are going to be factors that we're going to have to work on in the counseling sessions so that they don't relapse due to these factors. And so it's going to help, this assessment is going to help us determine what specific interventions are going to help to establish the client's recovery goals and to make the necessary lifestyle changes to reach these goals. And so your challenge in the assessment stage is to learn about your client's life and help them to recognize the value of counseling. And there might be a lot of pressures in your client's life that have led to their drug use. And so you need to learn as much as you can about that person's background before you can presume to judge. It's not helpful to make your clients feel guilty. So there's some main goals, and I'm talking specifically about these 3 main goals that you should try to achieve in your assessment. First, you should try to develop your relationship with your client so that they feel confident about your ability to help and assist them with their problems. And then you should try to clarify the nature and the severity of the problem that they have. And then after identifying that existing problem or problems, then you should help them to identify a plan of action to respond to those problems. And then you can coach them on how to follow that plan. So to do this, you need to achieve a couple of things. First, we need to gather information about the client's social, physical, mental, and work history. And then we need to motivate the client to engage in treatment if necessary. We need to learn about the factors that led to the client to use drugs in the first place. And we also need to identify the client's emotional, personal, and economic needs that may require immediate attention and care. If somebody's homeless, they're probably not going to be worried about going to an IOP. I actually had this happen once. It was an outpatient program, and the guy was homeless, and he was literally sitting outside while trying to do the Zoom meeting while we were going through COVID, and he didn't come back. He missed like 4 or 5 sessions, and then he came back another session, and then I never saw him again. So we need to address the homelessness situation or economic situations, or maybe there's some personal situations, maybe domestic violence is going on. Things like this need to be addressed up front. And we want to make the necessary arrangements to address those needs with the client. Maybe referring them to a case manager if you have one available, or giving them resources. You can always give the client the phone number to 211, which is the United Way, and that can help them with finding resources in their areas. We also want to identify the client's strengths. So what is the potentially supportive and useful elements in their life? Can they read and write? Do they have an education? Do they have a job? Or do they have a support system? What are some of those strengths that the client has? And then provide information to the client about how you are going to work with them, how the organization that you work for is going to help, and the treatment philosophy and the program structures that you have. Every organization has a different program structure, so it's going to be important for you to explain the structure of your program as opposed to other programs, and maybe identifying to the client what level of care your program offers. And it offers multiple levels of care and how the process goes to get into the different levels of care. So if you offer detox and residential, then what's the process of dropping down from detox into residential, and how long does that typically take? And what are the requirements of that, and so on and so forth? Or if you have an IOP that drops down to an outpatient, how does that work? What are the requirements of that? So now you want to understand what the client actually wants. What have they come to see you for? So you're trying to understand whether or not they're addicted to drugs, because the various solutions that you're going to choose are going to depend on their addiction status. So for example, like heroin users, you really want to know how much and how often they're using heroin each day. And you want to know how tolerant they are to the effects of heroin, and you want to know if they're using any other drugs. And for alcohol, you want to know how much and how frequently have they been using, how long have they been using alcohol, because even just one a day can lead to severe withdrawal, and withdrawal from alcohol can be deadly. So we may want to put them in a medication-assisted detox center at that point so that they can detox medically and then they can come to your program. You need to make some assessment of how motivated they are to do something about their drug use. Just because somebody comes to see you doesn't mean that they want to change their behavior. And you also need to know about the social support network that can help them, because the more social support that they have, the more likely they are to be successful in changing their behavior. And then you need to know if they have any health or social or psychiatric problems, because those too can interfere with the capacity to change their lifestyle. So it's important for us to understand all of these things. So unfortunately, a lot of people are still under this mindset that drug addiction is a moral weakness. But we now know that, in fact, addiction is a chronic relapsing medical condition that does have biological and sociological and psychological consequences. So as a counselor, you need to focus on all three of those components. And if you just treat one component, the problem's going to continue to exist. So in your future role as a counselor, you're going to find that clients will bring a variety of problems to you, and you're going to directly manage some of those problems without referral. But sometimes you're going to recognize serious problems that are outside of your expertise. So you might need to refer them to other agencies or people to help provide this service. And even though you don't deal with that problem directly, it's still important that you do what you can to assist your client, and that you recognize that this is something about which your client is concerned. So to engage clients fully, we need to remember that if you deal with the problem that they are most concerned about, you're more likely to gain their trust to deal with the problems that you are most concerned about. And a lot of clients are going to have problems with their family or with their employment or the law or housing, and you might need assistance from other people to help with these problems, like maybe a case manager. So this slide shows that most drug counseling services deal directly with problems like drug use and the related behaviors, but few deal directly with the problems like employment and housing. And so you're likely to refer your client for assistance with these problems. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those problems are less important. What it means is that drug counseling is going to specialize in the field of drug treatment, and recognizing that these other problems can significantly interfere with successful rehabilitation. So the assessment's going to give you some insight about whether these problems exist and how best to respond to them. So to maximize treatment outcomes, counselors need to give high priority to psychological and social issues. And that's in addition to the client's drug use issues. And clients with serious psychological or social problems are going to have serious difficulty in succeeding in drug counseling and treatment and rehabilitation, especially in a group setting. And these are the 5 critical components that have to be addressed in your initial assessment. And we're going to spend some time talking in detail about each, but it's the psychosocial, the drug use, the medical and psychiatric issues, the treatment selection issues, and the examination. So, apart from the basic demographic information like the client's name, address, age, and gender, you're also going to want to know who the client's living with, their roles and attitudes toward the client, and whether any member of the family also has a history of drug use. You want to ask about close friends and relatives and other significant people who may influence your client. And you need to assess the degree to which your client's family and other relationships have been affected by their drug use. And we want to keep in mind that maintaining a compassionate approach, you can be able to explore a couple of areas with your client. Like, do you have a job? Tell me how you make a living. Or do you have any debts? Please tell me about them. And I'll usually go into detail like, do you have any credit card debt? Or you got any student loans? Are you paying child support? Like, what's going on there financially with you? Saying something like, have you ever had to sell your valuables or those belonging to other members of your family to purchase drugs? Or have you ever had any trouble with the police? Tell me what happened. And I want to know, were you arrested? Did you get convicted of this? Did you get on probation for this? Do you have any pending charges? I'm going to ask a lot of questions about that. Where do they live? What do they do to get money? And confronted by their own replies, it becomes really difficult for the clients to continue to deny that their drug use has serious consequences. And it also becomes difficult for them to look for scapegoats to hold responsible for these problems because all of these consequences are client-centered. So I want you to think about the kinds of information to look for when we make an assessment of the client's drug use history. What kind of questions are you going to be asking? And I'm going to put an open-ended question in the lesson below. I'd like for you to answer that question. So, some drug users may come to your counseling services for reasons other than wanting to live a drug-free life. They may come to seek relief from withdrawal symptoms. So you're going to need information about your client's past and present drug use to gauge their situation. It's going to be important for you to ask your clients a couple of questions. How and under what circumstances did you begin to use drugs, and what types of drugs have you used? How long have you been using each of them? How much have you used in the past or recently or currently? And what's the frequency and duration of that use? And which drug do you perceive caused your main problems? And how do you take that drug? Are you swallowing it, smoking it, injecting it? What are you doing? And if you do inject it, do you do it alone or in the company of friends who share needles? Are you cleaning the needles before and after each use? Hepatitis and HIV infection are some real threats to the drug users who share the needles. So the client may not be aware of the health risk at first, but in the process of counseling and rehabilitation, they may renew that desire to care for their health. And so your client may have participated in other treatment programs in the past. So you should ask about the previous treatment programs that your client has tried and how he or she perceived the success of those approaches. And it might be helpful to learn about the frequency and duration of any periods of abstinence for each drug. And we want to ask about how long the previous periods of abstinence lasted and how long it took to relapse. People relapse for different reasons, and generally speaking, each client has their own weak points or personal triggers that can lead to relapse. And that information is going to be really important during the rehabilitation and relapse prevention phase. And I like to ask the questions in a disarming way. I don't want to come out and say, oh, well, how much alcohol are you drinking? It kind of sounds persecutory. So I try to start out the line of questioning with, so how old were you when you had your first drink? What about weed? How old were you when you had the first time you smoked. And then I'll go down like a whole list of all the drugs and just ask them how old they were when they started using it. And that's very disarming. And then, they feel a little bit more comfortable answering those questions. So you could say, okay, so when's the last time you drank alcohol? And was it yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago? You kind of want to normalize it for them so they don't feel judged in that situation. And then I'll ask them, okay, so how much were you drinking when you did drink? Was it just a beer, a couple shots, mixed drinks, the whole bottle? Like, what are we doing here? What are we working with? And so they kind of understand that I'm not trying to persecute them or judge them. I'm just trying to gather some information so I can, get to know a little bit about their history. So it's going to be very important how you ask these questions. And then we also need to discuss any medical and psychiatric issues because they can be closely related to the client's drug use. And as counselors, we need to know which medical or psychiatric services the client should be referred to in order to ensure timely, effective, and comprehensive treatment. So, has this client been tested for HIV? It's essential to counsel the client before and after any HIV testing. Is the client female? Is she pregnant? Does the client have any problems with their heart or their liver? Has the client ever attempted suicide? And how would you ask this question? Because this is a really sensitive issue and it should be raised cautiously. You could ask your client if they've ever thought life was so difficult that they thought it wasn't worth going on. And if the client says yes, then ask what did they do? And then you can then explore whether they still have the thoughts now. And if the client does, then they may require a medical assessment. And then has the client ever had an overdose? So going back to the suicide assessment, there is the Columbia, and there are trainings out there on how to use the Columbia. But the first question is, have you ever thought about killing yourself or harming yourself? Or do you have dreams about going to sleep and not waking up? And so these are very disarming questions that, oh yeah, I've thought about it before. It doesn't mean that I've actually done it or, want to do that. Or other clients will say, yes, I've thought about it and I've actually put the gun to my head, or I have slit my wrists, or I told somebody that I was going to kill myself. And so when we go through the Columbia questions, there's 6 questions there. That you can go through to kind of ascertain, is this client in need of further evaluation from an LPC or an LCSW for possible commitment at that point. And then we also want to, the last one was ascertaining if the client has ever had an overdose. I've had some clients that had an overdose and that was their wake-up call. And I've had other clients that have had overdoses where they've had multiple overdoses and they just keep going back to it, and they know that they're probably going to overdose, and they've somehow convinced themselves that because they've survived these overdoses previously that they are going to survive the next one. So we need to determine where their mindset is with that. And it's going to be important for you to know what triggered your client to join a treatment program. Is it because their spouse left? Have they been arrested by the police recently? Is this person scared about the possibility of losing their job? Is the client being driven out of their home by their parents? Has a close friend recently died of an overdose? These are some of the reasons that drug users commonly give when they join a treatment program. And so a lot of the young drug users, particularly those who have been forced into treatment, tend to deny or dismiss the harm that's caused by their drug use. And they're going to claim that everything's all right. So we need to figure out how motivated is this client to recover from their drug use and the related difficulties. And what are the client's expectations from your services? I've had some people come in and say, okay, they cross their arms. Do your dog and pony show, Desiree. I'm ready to get you to sign my paper and I'm getting out of here. So what are their expectations from the services? And it's now the right time to ask your client about their priorities. Some drug users may say that they want their spouse to return home. Others may tell you that they're stressed because of their debts or because they've been suspended from work, and their priority is to pay back their debts or to get their jobs back. So get a sense of your client's commitment and capability for treatment by asking about their willingness to change and their confidence to change. The sum of these issues is going to determine the most appropriate intervention. And when you first meet with your client, you should conduct a basic assessment of their mental state to see whether their drug use has affected their mood or their behavior or their cognition. And you want to organize your observation around a couple of areas. So you want to ascertain their general appearance and their behavior. Are they shifting around in their seat? Are they having trouble sitting still? Do they look disheveled or like they haven't bathed or brushed their teeth in a while? Do they have any odors? What's their speech like? Is it forced? Is it extremely fast? Is it too slow? What's their affect and mood? Is it appropriate for the setting that you're in? What is the thought process, the stream, the form, the content of their thought processes? What's their perception? What's their cognition? What is their judgment, their insight, the rapport that you have? Are they interacting with you well? And you might wish to look at your client's injection sites to determine whether there's any serious damage there. And you can also look for signs of intoxication or withdrawal to see whether your client's account of their recent drug use is consistent with your observations. And you should also consider their overall nutritional state. I had a gentleman tell me that he wasn't using, but he came into the office with one chew. And his pupils were dilated, and he was talking really fast, and he was all over the place. And so obviously he was still high and was coming down off of whatever he was using. And so at that particular location, we did not do detox. And so I had to send him to a detox center. But he definitely was denying that he was using. So using your powers of observation to kind of ascertain, how do they look? How are they presenting to you? So to gauge whether or not your client is addicted to the main drug that they use, you can ask a couple of questions. And if your client provides a yes to 3 or more of those questions, then they probably are addicted to that drug. So you might start with, here's some questions about the problems that you may have experienced with your use of whatever their main drug is, cocaine or heroin. So thinking back over the last 12 months, and then I'm going to start asking some of these questions. So to gauge for tolerance, would you say you had to use more cocaine to get intoxicated or get that same high feeling? Or I might say, at any time, did you find that you seemed to be getting less of an effect when you used your usual amount? And then to gauge for withdrawal, did you experience withdrawal when the effects of cocaine began to wear off? Or did you take more cocaine or take some sort of other stimulant to kind of relieve or avoid the feeling of withdrawal symptoms? Or to ask about time, I might say, would you say you spend a lot of time like going to get cocaine, or a lot of time using it, or a lot of time recovering from the effects of it? And when I want to ask about quantity, I might say, would you say that you use cocaine in larger amounts or for longer periods of time than you would have wished? Like you started on a Friday and thought you were just going to go party that night, but then it ended up using all weekend long? Or maybe did you want to cut down or stop using, but you had a hard time doing it? These are some questions to gauge whether or not the person has a substance use disorder. And these are all part of the criteria, the 11 criteria in the DSM-5. So there's 11 criteria, but these are just a couple of them. And so if they're answering yes to 3 of these, then you can go ahead and mark it down as a substance use disorder. And then Some additional questions that you can ask is, did you reduce or give up any important work or recreation or social activities as a result of your drug use? Like you used to spend a lot of time with your kids or take them to ball games, but you don't take them to the ball games anymore, or you don't join your bowling league anymore. Or did you continue to use even though you knew it was causing or making your physical or your psychological problems worse? And so I might give them a couple of examples there as well, just to kind of help them to think about the question that I'm asking them. So there's two criteria that you can use to assess your client's level of physical addiction, and that's going to be tolerance and withdrawal syndrome. So the higher the dose of the drug is needed to achieve the same effect, that's going to be tolerance. And then withdrawal syndrome typically develops when when we're taking the drug and that ceases abruptly. So I'll see this with people who drink. This is an example here of people who drink and they have to go to work and they can't drink at work, and so they start shaking really badly, and so they on their lunch break they have to have a drink so that they can stop the shaking. That would be an example of ceasing the use abruptly and starting to experience the withdrawal symptoms. Specifically with opioid withdrawal, opioid users may experience moderate to severe but not life-threatening withdrawal syndrome. Um, I hear a lot of people say they feel like they're going to die with opioid withdrawal, but they're not going to die from withdrawal. Now, I had a client once try to battle me on this one, and he said, my grandfather died of opioid withdrawal. That's what his doctor said. Unfortunately, his doctor didn't explain to the client that it wasn't the opioid withdrawal itself that caused the death. It was the nausea and the vomiting that is a subsequent, and the diarrhea that subsequently happen in the opioid withdrawal that lead to dehydration. And if that dehydration is not taken care of properly, then the person can die from dehydration. But you're not going to die from withdrawal. The only thing that causes death with the opioids is, well, not the only thing, but the quickest thing that happens is the overdose. So you're not going to die within the withdrawal period. But the signs and symptoms of opioid withdrawal can be mistaken for a bad case of the flu. And there was a psychologist that once said, you better hope it's the withdrawal and not the flu, because the flu is going to kill you. So heroin withdrawal is rarely fatal unless that person becomes dehydrated and they may have a coexisting medical condition. So the onset and the duration of withdrawal varies according to the half-life of the drug used. And so withdrawal symptoms from heroin are usually going to commence about 6 to 12 hours after the last dose, and they may last for 5 to 7 days. And with methadone, withdrawal may not commence for 2 to 3 days, and after the most recent dose, it can last up to 3 weeks. Now, these are general numbers, but we've seen opioid withdrawal last for weeks on end and into months. So it is very painful for the client and not comfortable, and it can last for an extended period of time. So some of the symptoms that we see are anorexia, nausea, abdominal pain and cramps, hot and cold flushes, joint and muscle pain or twitching, poor sleep, drug cravings, restlessness and anxiety. Some of the signs that we see are yawning, tears, dilated pupils, sweating. They may have a runny nose or start sneezing, having tremors or goosebumps, and then, of course, the diarrhea and vomiting. And so the onset and the duration of the withdrawal is going to vary according to the drug used. And the withdrawal symptoms from heroin can happen 6 to 12 hours after that last dose. And like I said, they may last for 5 to 7 days. So the signs are going to include the large pupils. Pupils are going to constrict when individuals are intoxicated. Tears and sweating and runny nose and goosebumps are also signs. So this photo here Do you think this woman is currently experiencing withdrawal or intoxication? Um, just take a moment to kind of look at her. So the answer here is that her dilated pupils indicate that she's experiencing withdrawal from heroin. But she could also be intoxicated from ecstasy or methamphetamines or some other stimulant. So here's a chart that we can use. It's the severity of addiction scale. And these cutoff scores can help us to rank the client's severity of addiction for various drugs. So a methamphetamine is a 4 or more, alcohol is 3 or more, cannabis is 3 or more, or if it's adolescent, it's going to be 4 or more for the cannabis. Heroin is going to be 3 or more, and cocaine is going to be 4 or more overall. So apart from the sample assessment screening tool, which is in the handouts in this lesson, this is another tool that you can use. And this tool is very useful for assessing the severity of your client's psychological addiction. And you can also use it to talk to your client about their own perception of the severity of their drug use. So the Severity of Addiction Scale, which is the SAS, is a 5-item questionnaire that's designed to measure the degree of the client's psychological addiction to the drugs. So the SAS focuses on the psychological aspects of addiction, including impaired control of drug use and preoccupation with it and anxiety about the drug use in the last 12 months. So the SAS appears to be a reliable measure of addiction. And it's been demonstrated, it's demonstrated good psychometric properties with heroin and cocaine and amphetamine and cannabis users. So the cutoff scores of 4, 3, and 6 are indicative of amphetamines, cannabis, and benzodiazepine addiction, respectively. So with the amphetamines, it's a 4, the cannabis is a 3, and for the benzodiazepines, it's going to be a 6. And it's important for you to help your clients talk through these issues so that they're going to be able to better start taking responsibility for their drug use. So the first meeting is going to be successful if you can help your client to recognize and admit that they have a problem with drug use. And also agree to accept the counseling and the treatment voluntarily. And understand that while drugs may appear to help them feel better and cope with their problems, there can be some negative destructive forces in their life. And also to understand that, they're going to have to work really hard and cooperate with you if they're, really wanting to solve their problems. You may need to assure that your client, through counseling can learn healthier, safer ways to address a lot of their problems. So during the assessment, your job is to hold a mirror up to the client by helping them to tell their life story. And then as you're talking about this history with your client, you can help them to accept the challenge of counseling and treatment. Your client needs to know that it's going to be hard work, but it's going to be worth the struggle, and you're going to be there to help them. I tell them, we're putting together a puzzle, and I'm putting the edges around for this puzzle. I'm going to put those together for you. And then I'm going to sit here and I'm going to hand you the pieces for you to put the puzzle together yourself. We're going to work together on this. My clinical supervisor used to say, I'm just the midwife here. It's your baby. I'm here to help you have your baby. So like I said in the beginning, there is a role play that you can do with somebody that you're close with. Maybe do it with another student or do it with another coworker or somebody. Do it with your clinical supervisor. But in this role play, I don't want you to make it too easy for the counselor. If you and someone else are playing counselor, both take turns doing this. So when you're playing the role of client, don't make it easy. you should try to, make them work hard to get the information from you. Give answers that are either a little unclear or they're not good answers to their question. And when the counselors persist, you can then give them the information that they're looking for. So you can get into a group or get with your partner and allow about 20 minutes for the role play. There's a sample assessment screening form in the course below this video with additional questions for specific concerns for mental health and family functioning. But it's important to note that an initial assessment screening session should be short but meaningful, and the client should not feel as if the experience has been too intrusive or overwhelming. You only want to collect enough data to make the necessary decisions that, you can make a full assessment later. You're going to need to decide first whether the client requires urgent medical attention. Your other primary concerns are the client's history of drug use or problems associated with their drug use or their physical and mental health. Typically, this is known as triage because you're just trying to ascertain what the problem is and what they're trying to what they're looking for. Are they looking for medication? Are they looking for counseling services? Do they need a mental health evaluation? Do they need a substance abuse evaluation? Are they looking for eating disorder treatment? Are they looking for gambling treatment? We don't know what we're going to get until we start screening these clients. So they have to be screened first before they can be scheduled for an assessment. So you need to screen for appropriateness. And that's what this whole role play is about, is screening for appropriateness for your program. So this sample role play here, the questionnaires are only part of an assessment. We have engagement, building rapport, observation, elaboration on answers, and exploring significant statements and answers are all part of the assessment process. Never just fill out a questionnaire and assume that an assessment has been undertaken. You don't want them to just fill out the questionnaire and hand it in and then you type up the answers. That is not good enough. You can have them fill out the answers on the questionnaire, but you're going to go back and ask every single one of those questions because there are going to be some ambiguous answers, or they may not answer questions at all. And you may start asking questions and then they go into a little bit more detail and you find out that they weren't truthful in another question that was answered. So it's extremely important to ask these questions. So I've included this role play a little bit lower in this course. If you just scroll down, you'll be able to see it. And you can watch this sample role play of this assessment being done. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the discussion box below at the bottom of this lesson. Also, I've included multiple documents, PDF documents, in this particular lesson about ASAM criteria, levels of care, things of that nature. There's a lot of documentation that I've provided for you. I would highly recommend you downloading those and saving those to your computer so that you have them to access later when you're doing assessments so that you can figure out the appropriate level of care for your clients.